growing, and we're growing at a rate higher than the year before, we
Correct.
benefit from that year lag
1 year.
just for 1 year, because the state catches up to us that very next year.
So the percent change, the 9.98% change, is the difference between the CAD value and the CPTD value?
No, that one is year-over-year CPTD to CPTD.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's the increase from the previous year,
We're just-
13 to 14.
We're not including the CAD in this
all.
calculation, because it's not applicable in this
Right.
calculation.
Okay.
I used in fiscal year 16, 17, I used the 11.5% increase in CPTD because that's the increase that we experienced in CAD. So that's just a guess, but
So it's an
you expect them
estimate.
to be similar.
Okay. Okay, that helps, thank you.
So we understood from your memo that even though this is kind of complicated, at this point, there's no cost to the district. When we acknowledge this and something happens and there's no actual cost until we get to the 519,000 level. Is that my understanding?
514, yes, that's correct.
514, sorry.
Right.
Okay. And then, is there something that could change that would cause the district cost in that? Or as the law is written right now?
Yeah, as the law is written right now, this is where we stand, unless they change the value, and that would have to happen in a legislative session.
Right. But that one number, that 514 number, if anything, is likely to go up as opposed to going down. Because last time it was adjusted up. And I don't recall it ever being adjusted down.
I think, could there be, though, I want to make sure we provide a thorough response, though, is it conceivable that in the event we begin hitting increases at the 10 and 11 and 12% rate, if this 11.5 were to continue for 3 or 4 years, local factors, if our values really balloon, it could impact that as well from the
Yeah, we
Absolutely.
could,
side
we
of the
certainly could
equation.
get there soon, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
So we could get to the 514 sooner, but the 514 is a pretty fixed number, is what you're...
But, well, it did recently just get changed, and it could get changed again. I do think that it's likely that many of these numbers will get looked at very hard in the next special session that would result as the lawsuit, okay?
And
So
it
we'll have
gets-
to pay attention to that.
Excuse me, it gets changed by the comptroller, or it gets changed by the state legislature?
The state legislature.
And I think that is a good point, Steve, that as the lawsuit is resolved, it could all dramatically change. Because depending on how many districts are in this position we're in, they could change that number to increase it to put fewer districts in recapture. So there is a lot of uncertainty around this right now, based on the lawsuit outcomes.
Right.
All right, well, thank you. Do we have more questions,
Yeah,
Mr. Rosenthal?
so can you just summarize then the difference between non-chapter and chapter 41? Is it you're subject to recapture?
No. The distinction is property poor versus property wealthy. We're considered now property wealthy, but just over that threshold. We're not subject to recapture. There's a handful of us that are in this situation. But we've been hovering right under.
So it's just a classification.
Correct.
Right.
To change. Okay.
We used to be called a Chapter 42 district because we were beneath that. Now we're a Chapter 41 district by definition, but we're not subject to recapture.
So you might add, what is the point of this discussion tonight? Because the board, we are going to ask for action on something next week related to this, so it'd be good to kind of lay that out as well.
Okay, so because we've reached the status of Chapter 41, there's a bunch of hoops that we have to jump through for TEA. Even though we're not recapturable, we have to behave like we're going to be recapturable. So we have to select the options just like a recapture district would, even though our recapture amount is 0. And this requires board action by law if we do not have approval from the commissioner to reduce our wealth level by doing one of these 5 things. And we're recommending to purchase attendance credits to lower our wealth. But the purchase of them is at a cost of 0. So we have to go through the hoops. We need board approval to do it, to make the entry, to select the option. The commissioner has to approve it, and then we can adopt our tax rate, only then.
Thank you. Do we have additional questions? Mrs. Costello?
Why is the cost 0?
Why does it cost?
Why is
zero?
the cost 0?
Because we're not past the threshold of the 6 copper pennies, and so those pennies that were up to $1.04, we could go up to $1.06. They're not recapturable ever, unless
So-
we hit the $5.14.
Okay, so it costs us nothing as long as we stay below the 6 pennies and below the 5.14 threshold.
Correct.
At least tonight, right now, before the Supreme Court rules and everything changes.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, obviously, this isn't something we're choosing to do. You know, we're reacting to, you know, the rules set forth by TEA.
All right, well, go ahead. Ms.
Happens
Songa.
What happens if we don't do it?
That wouldn't be advisable. What happens is, you know, taxpayers could protest the tax rate at that point because we don't have approval from the commissioner to move forward with adoption. If we don't adopt a tax rate, then we can't collect. And at that point, you can have protesters come in, and it can be a very long process, and then we can't collect.
Great question. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next thing. Thank you,
Ready.
Ms. Edgar, very much.
Next item is also a finance-related item. We're proposing some updates to the district's fiscal and budgetary strategy, and Steve's going to talk through those as well.
Okay, so we have a few changes that we're proposing. Ms. James, I'm not sure if you want me to walk you through them, or if you want me to just take questions on them.
Yeah, I think you provided a nice summary of the changes. I know I had a couple of questions, but so maybe we can just go for questions. Does that seem all right to everybody? I know one of the, seeing budget amendments up there, you're changing the approvals that needed to come to the board. Those that involved function change did not need to come to the board, but only those that involved fund change. Can you explain what that means and
Right.
what the impact would be to us and why you're recommending
Okay,
that
so
change?
for example, at a campus budget will have multiple functions. Okay, they'll have obviously function 11, which is where most of their spending is, but they'll also have funds set aside in function 33, for example, for their health.
Pretend we don't know what function
Well-
33 is.
No, I'm about to tell you.
Okay,
For the healthcare costs, anything associated with health services. So the nurses and nurses' aides, their salaries are in function 33. And then all of the expenses associated with the clinics, for example, are in function 33. They can also have any of the expenses associated with the counselors. The counselors are in a different function. They're in function 31. The librarians, for example, they're in function 12. And so this gives campuses the ability to transfer budgeted funds between the functions, okay, as they see fit. But we won't be adding to their budget. This just gives them more flexibility. And so what would happen is that whenever we would show future amendments to the board, because the board is required by law to approve the overall functions for the budgets, you would see that as just a column of adjustments that would total to 0, because we wouldn't be adding to all the functions, ET pluses and minuses in the various functions. And so that's how we would work mechanically, but we wouldn't be adding anything to the overall budget without board approval. It would give budget managers the ability to move funds between functions.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
I'll absorb that. Does anybody else have any questions on this? On any of the other strategy items? I know I do. I don't see anything like, so I'm gonna. I appreciate that. Okay, well, let's follow up then on that function thing. So this might, don't take this the wrong way. So if somebody, let's say they're a little short in one area, and they then move money out of something, okay? But let's say that's something they move it out of is a critical need area. So they cover their want out of their need budget, and then, oh, it comes to us and we're like, oh, well, you definitely need that, so we better approve more money. What's the check and balance to make sure that that doesn't happen? Are you following my question?
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, the check and balance is that, I mean, we strive very hard to not have overall increases, to our budget, in terms of our budget amendments. I mean, outside of the PO roll, which you understand the PO roll process. And so unless there's a major initiative or something else that you know about and you know about the monies tied to that, that would really be the only reason why we're bringing, budget amendments that increase the budget to you. Okay, and so, really what we're trying to do is, making sure that the budget managers, stay within their budgets, and we're holding them accountable to stay within their budgets, but we're giving them more flexibility within their budgets.
So you're holding them accountable to stay within their budgets, and you're giving them flexibility within the lump sum. And I guess what I'm trying to understand then is, if the board is responsible for what is spent in each function area, how are we going to exercise that oversight? I hear you saying you'll bring us a list that all totals to zero. I'm just trying to understand how we exercise proper oversight.
I think how you exercise proper oversight is whenever we're going through and you're looking at the spending on a per function basis. It's similar to like the chart you may have seen whenever I showed how our spending for function 41, which is mainly for central administration, how that spending on a per student basis compares with other districts and the like. And so that's really the main way you would exercise oversight in terms of looking at those kinds of reports and questioning, well, gosh, why are we so much higher in this one function per student versus another district per se? Because I mean, now as it stands, you're getting the functional reports, okay, but you have to approve them. You're not required to show oversight, but you are required to approve them by law to approve the budget on a per function basis. And so, I mean, I don't know if I'm really addressing your question, but I think the main way to have the oversight is to be able to look at how we're spending in total comparison to our peers, but then also on a per function basis in comparison to our peers.
Steve, let me interject, because I think we are kind of at a granular level in trying to explain this. The board's governance pertains to the function level on an organization-wide budget. And so, when you approve that, we go through the object and all of those things, and then when you act, it's only like 8 or 10 lines, the number of functions.
Right.
So what we're asking for here really does not even go to the budget manager level. The way it impacts budget managers, though, is, for example, now when you approve the budget, that's made up of over 100 different budget managers, campuses, central administrative departments, and all of those things. So currently, if we have a campus who wants to move money from function 11 to function 12, we can kind of cycle that through a district level budget, where we take their 11, put it in this pot, we give them 12 where they need it, and then they're able to do that. And then we manage that. That's why we have a budget officer. It's all at the district level where you already approved the budget. And so the governance would not change at all, because we're already doing these transfers within the overall budget. Where we sometimes run into a hitch, and this would give us more flexibility though, is sometimes we run lean on the district level at, say, just function 11. And the budget manager doesn't have the flexibility to take and give a campus or an administrative department the transfer they need, because then it would cause us to cross the line and go overboard on one of them. And so what we're asking for is really the latitude to, again, keep the bottom line budget the same, but to just have that latitude of, on an organizational level, if we need to swap a little bit between 11 and 13 or 12 and 31 to meet the needs. Because often what happens when we're in that bind, we cannot commit funds, we can't issue a PO if we don't have available funds. And so this is really a flexibility issue that allows us to not hold up the work. And that, I don't think it's something we really run into frequently, but it does sometimes happen, especially as you get later in the year and the spending is down and you need to get a major PO out and you've got the money in your budget, but it's just not in the right function. So the governance is still at the same level it currently is, where you get a monthly report. And then if there's ever a situation where the bottom line would need to go up, then we would defend that and seek approval for that.
Okay, and I can understand that, so I guess what I would say then is if the bottom line is going to go up, then I would like to be able to see those comparisons, Steve, that you're talking about, and I'd like to be able to see the comparisons to previous years, so that we can understand the trend and the reasonableness of the trend. Because I think we would all agree that we want to be able to feel comfortable with, we understand your need for flexibility, but we also take our role to make seriously to make sure that what we're doing is what we expected to be doing, versus money being spent in ways that the board doesn't intend or doesn't expect.
That was my, excuse me, my comment too. I'm okay with the flexibility, that as long as you continue to, give us, good updates to make sure that we can see those changes. So that's fine with me.
All right. Mrs. Tosan, you want to take a
I
turn?
just have a question about timing on that. So if money gets moved, for example, from function 11 to function 12, because you guys feel like you need to do that, when that happens, will we get an update on that, or will we get something that will show us that when that happened and, a date and for what, just to kind of alert us to it that it's going on?
Right now, I mean, the way this was handled in my previous districts is that as part of the budget amendment page, the budget amendment summary, we just showed the board, that movement in total, okay?
Okay.
And we didn't give them the detail of each transaction.
Right, no, but I'm saying when do we get those updates?
That would be, that update would happen the next time we actually have an amendment. And so in this situation, we would have an amendment in the September timeframe, usually September, October, whenever we do the PO roll. Okay, that's the first time we have a budget amendment. We'll probably have another budget amendment in the February timeframe, and then obviously you have one at the end of the year. And so, but whenever we have an amendment, that's when you would see any of the movement between
So
funds.
basically, those three times out of the year, we would see what activity had happened over the past
And
years.
anytime there's an amendment, if there's one in between that we need, you'll know why, but we'll include, okay, well, these are the transfers today.
Steve, would it be possible to include in the monthly financial reporting set?
That might be.
Sure.
Because that way it's more real time. Because the
Okay.
functions are going to shift anyway during the monthly report if we do that.
Okay, we can look at that,
Okay, I think that would be helpful, because then maybe we can,
all right?
and I think as we're getting comfortable with maybe this change, that would help us see what's happening, when it's happening, how it's happening, and then as we move forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we have more questions on that topic. I have a question on the other revenue, which is, between those two pages. So I understand this idea, and this comes up a couple of different times in the different things tonight, in the policies and so forth. So that's great. We have it, exploring enterprise funds and our new director and all of that. So, but what came to my mind when I looked at this, logos, rentals of facilities, et cetera, advertising, where does the board get involved in that determination of what those things are? And maybe the question comes down to, are the policies and procedures up to date that govern those things? And what's sort of the status of that?
Okay. Well, we're bringing one of the issues we're working on, facility rentals and all, so there's actually, policy that we're proposing on that. A lot of these things aren't necessarily covered at that local legal level, I mean, I probably need to get back to you on that.
Well, okay, I think that would be good. And I know that maybe 3 years ago, we had a conversation about policies related to advertising and what we wanted to do, and we sort of went through some iterations of that. We didn't have a good process in place, and we didn't really, you know, we have some things, and we've done, you know, like with Methodist and all. So I'm just thinking that maybe that's, as this kind of comes together, I think the policies and procedures that go along with it are important to consider, and I would like to suggest that while it states in our funding, or in our strategy here, that you'll follow board policy, I'd like to just suggest perhaps the board policy isn't up to date, and I don't know about the procedures that would come out of that. So,
Okay.
does anybody else have a comment on that?
Okay. I have a question. It's
Go ahead.
kind of a little bit related to the facility rental and use of our proper utilization of our assets. Are our facilities like sports fields and things available for rental to any group or any other, say, private school or anything like that? Because I was asked that recently.
I don't think that we rent to the private schools. I mean, we allow some usage, okay? But as far as the athletics are concerned, I'm still getting familiar with that. Was Brenda, did you want to come on out?
Microphone.
Make sure you get to a microphone. And this is Brenda Essenberg. She's our new director.
Currently, what I'm learning is that we are leasing those fields to the public. So a private school could potentially lease that, so could the Little Leagues and things such as that. I'm fixing to meet with our maintenance division on who we want to let use those fields to build those procedures that you're talking about, and to set some of those rates so that we can recoup any damage to the fields. I think we had an occurrence where there were a lot of divots left in the field because it had been real rainy. So we're looking at how to build those procedures to allow more venues to rent those. But I think currently right now our heavy users are the Little Leagues and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and those type of organizations.
We have had some usage of some of our stadiums, you know, as far as the AstroTurf, and they've had some football camps and things like that. Usually those are for profit, and they're making some payments.
No, I was asked by somebody that's involved with the charter school or maybe a home school or something, that they had asked about renting one of the playing fields somewhere,
Mhm.
and I think they were told no, so.
Well, it is common for, to not necessarily rent out, the football playing field, you know, per
No, I'm
se.
not talking about like Hall Stadium or.
No,
I'm
but
not
like,
talking about
like
those.
even at Ridge Point, for example, you know, it's common where they wouldn't rent that one out, but they would allow somebody to use one of the other fields,
Right,
for example.
right, like First Colony football field or
Yeah.
wherever, any of the middle school fields or something. Okay. Is that in our policy somewhere, or that's, I mean, that kind of ties into what we're talking about? Is that spelled out? Because I asked them to go check, and I hadn't heard back, so.
Currently, the policy states that if it's not listed specifically in the policy, they can contact the office to see. And we've been coordinating with athletics to make sure that they're agreeable and maintenance.
Okay. I'm just wondering if we can be a little more specific in that, and,
That's
clarify
what,
which fields are,
Yeah.
we would be agreeable to.
that's
or
what
which
Brenda's
facilities.
working on. We just need the whole
Yes, sir.
thing to be much more
Yeah.
detailed,
Right.
so people can see it and know clearly what's available in the rate. and those
Correct.
kinds of
Right.
things.
Right, and I think then, I mean, part of that is a policy, right, that the board, so that you're clear on the board's philosophy. And then the second part of that is the specifics of the procedures, which might be a little more flexible,
Correct.
but still visible to the public so they know what to expect.
Correct.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Mrs. Tossan?
So I had a similar question related to policy on this one in particular. And we talk about utilization of assets, including trademarks of logos. So my question was about policy regarding utilization, but also policy regarding protection. Do we have anything related to protection of district assets such as intellectual property type assets, so trademarks, and copyrights, and specifically related to marking and that kind of thing.
I'm not aware of us having anything like that. I don't know, Cynthia, or do you mind?
I can tell you. We're doing a review, we're working with legal to do a review to see which ones of our logos need trademarks. And so right now, we're working with an attorney to go through our district and our campus logos to just make sure they're all properly being used. And then we'll go from there as far as like what the procedure will be in using them. So
Okay.
that's under review right now.
I know we had some issues with some members of the community using our logo and it, as if it was a district-sponsored something, so that's probably something that needs to be looked into. In addition to, when you guys are reviewing that, maybe looking at, some policies or procedures around proper marking, which relates to protection for trademarks and copyrights. I would be interested to see if we have anything like that, or at least maybe as we're drafting policy, putting something like that in here would be a good idea. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think we've made it clear we'd like that policy on the list, on the to-do list. All right, any other questions regarding the fiscal and budgetary strategy? I think the other main thing that's added in here is the use of commercial paper, which we had talked about. That's, oops, you just passed it. It's on number 10, which we had talked about at a workshop this spring. And yes,
I have a
Mr.
question.
George.
So when it comes to commercial papers, and we are simply using that to finance our short-term debt, is that,
Yes,
does that
yes.
sound?
That's
Okay.
exactly right. And so what we have is, as we go through our cash flow process and analysis, again, our whole intent is to have our borrowing costs as low as possible. And so as we plan our new issuances of debt, and as we use our general fund reimbursement resolution, okay, there may come a time where we're not ready to go to the market, but we may need some funds
Sure.
to stay current on our bills.
Right.
And so that's when we would use the commercial paper
Sure.
with the maximum maturity of those to be 270 days.
Understood. Okay. So is this debt is eventually going to be migrated to become long-term debt, or?
Yes. Yes,
So
it will.
where do you decide, when do you decide, after 270 days, or?
Oh, no,
or
we
reissue again?
We would
and-
decide certainly before that, and so we would have a new money issue, and we would use some of those funds to pay off that commercial paper.
Okay, is that possible you roll it over and over to another commercial paper for another term?
I think that's possible, but I don't think that's necessarily the intent for that to be rolling on an ongoing basis.
So, and also we had a numerous discussion about it, and your team is pretty convinced about financially this make more sense, as
Right.
well as expense and.
Right, I mean, the
cost.
rates, for that, are very low, and we'll be keeping up with that. And so, just to be frank, it'll be interesting as we go along with this to see how we feel about it, when we think about that. And so, just like, we sent to the board, submit to the board a synopsis of what had happened in our last new money issue, we would be doing the same thing. Whenever we talked about the budget and the debt, we'd say, okay, this is what's happened, this is what we're thinking. So, I don't think anything is necessarily set in stone,
Right.
not by a long shot, but this just gives us that flexibility.
And also, when you're talking about millions of dollars, even few basis point can make a lot of difference.
Absolutely. Every basis point matters.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. George. Do we have any other questions on this? All right, then, thank you very much, Mr. Bassett, for that information. And the board's now ready to convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act for the purpose of a private consultation with the board's attorney and for personnel matters. The board is now convened in closed session.